is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. Parents, how you doing these days? From homeschooling to working at home or still juggling going to your job while your kids are at home, this pandemic life leaves much to be desired. We want to hear from you as we focus Where We Live on online learning for your K through 12 students. Now, I used to worry too much if my kids watched a lot of TV, but honestly, it's the only way I can do the show live from my house without interruption. And TV time for a small part of the morning makes my children more likely to do their online schoolwork later. How about you? What have you tried to get your kids motivated for homeschooling and while also trying to keep your sanity? We want to hear from you. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. KJ on Twitter writes, online learning requires way more discipline on the part of the student and way more paperwork on the part of the teacher. We need to plan better for the next time this happens. We're going to be talking with people who work in education later on the show, but I wanted to hear from a parent first. So joining us via Zoom is Gwen Samuel. She's founder and president of Connecticut Parents Union. It's an advocacy group that's parent-led that works to obtain educational opportunities for all. Gwen, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, you have a child in the Meriden School District. Tell us, it's been, I believe, more than a month now. All the days are blending together. Tell us about how your school district communicated about how this had to be now homeschooling because of the pandemic.
So for Meriden, and I also, as the founder of the Connecticut Parents Union, I work with other cities, so I'm going to talk about Middletown as well. I mean, notifications, even with the uncertainty, notifications went out immediately, especially after the school closures. So that was the benefit of the district. They were on point with notification to parents. But the challenges were parents ready for online learning? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily mentally ready, which is a whole nother conversation, having the tools in their house for children to engage in online learning, like internet in your home. Does every child have a computer? Are they technology savvy? When you think about grandparents, the same thing. So for me, my daughter, this is her last year of school. So for her, jumping on the computer and doing the work wasn't a problem. The challenge was she just rushed through it. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not an educator, so I don't know if all the work is right. But so those are my challenges of, just making sure that she's taking her time with her homework versus just do it. Yeah.
Now, Gwen, with your organization, you're hearing from parents and other school districts. From hearing from them, from talking with educators, how have Connecticut School District handled this? It is really unprecedented. And as you mentioned, depending on the district, access to computers, access to internet, or even having an adult there to help at home during the day.
Well, the stories have been very mixed. And you do have some very unhappy campers, as they say, for parents. Because again, you could have intergenerational issues because in our country, we have more grandparents raising children. So there's clearly that technology barrier. The speeds are like a super big issue. I had one family call me and she's like, Gwen, I just got a robocall. Miss Gwen, I just got a robocall that my child wasn't in attendance. This was in Meriden. They since corrected the issue. So she thought, well, we were supposed to go back to school, but what it was, they were taking attendance by logins. But the challenge with that is she didn't have internet access. She couldn't gain access to it because they said only certain providers were in her district and it was hard to get through and affordability became an issue. And then all of her kids didn't have a computer. Mm-hmm. So once the commissioner of education took the focus off so much focusing on attendance, it allowed parents more time to adapt. So some of the issues were speed. That's a big issue. Some children can't, only one child at a time, which could cause a problem when you have multiple grade levels in your house who have to log in for their assignment, but there is not enough speed with the internet for all children to be online. So that's one of the major issues that I'm seeing. And then, of course, actually being able to actual log in, not because of the login credentials, but again, there's this mass draw on the internet, which also reduces speeds and cause instability in login. That's
You're
one of our
hearing,
main.
yeah, you're hearing Gwen Samuel, founder and president of Connecticut Parents Union. She's joining us on Zoom today on Where We Live as we talk about online learning. Now that Connecticut school kids in K through 12 have been home for more than a month, how's it going in your home? You can join our conversation 888-720-WMPR. That's 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I wanted to bring into the conversation now Jenny Miles Weiner, associate professor of educational leadership at UConn NEAG School of Education. She also wrote a New York Times piece titled, "I Refuse to Run a Coronavirus Homeschool." Jenny, welcome to our show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
You're also a mother, so what has the experience been like for your children at home as you're trying to keep them occupied and they're not in school?
Yes, so I am a mother of, soon to be 9-year-old twin boys, one of whom has a disability and is typically in a substantially separate classroom. So you might imagine that their lives look quite different than they did when they had multiple caring adults at a school with a highly structured day. We have been attempting to do what we can when it feels right. We have wonderful teachers, and they've been sending home things more, I would say, oriented towards caring for us and ensuring that we have what we need, but are not overburdened by it. And we pick and choose to the extent that's possible. And that gives us the ability to function and feel resilient during the day. And a lot of our day really is also about, with 2 full-time working parents, trying to make sure the kids are occupied and not killing each other so that we're able to do the things that we need to do during those 12 hours that they're awake or more every day.
I was thinking that it's easy, when we sent our children to school, they were used to that structure and that schedule, and now they're home and also expected to just adapt to this online module of learning while everyone else is trying to get their work done. And that is challenging, as we all know. You can also join our conversation. We want to hear about your experiences. But Jenny, before we take some listener calls, I wanted to focus a little bit on what you wrote for the New York Times and some of the points that you wanted to put out there for parents as we're all trying to deal with this new way of life.
Yeah. So some of the things that I think I was really moved to kind of express in that piece was that, first of all, the idea that parents on a dime could replicate, even under the best of conditions, meaning if there was not a global pandemic, what happens within the context of a school day every day feels to me like a fool's errand to some extent, right? Because there's so much more than content delivery that happens in any sort of individual day that children are experiencing school. Whether that be, the arts, the ability to connect with caring adults, the ability to connect with their friends and other people that they care about. And also, so then you add the fact that we are also, meaning parents, are expected to then, many of us, continue our own work. That we're dealing with a global pandemic. We might be fearful for our own health and safety. We may be having to negotiate family members, other caregiver loved ones, caretaking in other spaces. And you put that all together and just say, well, business as usual just felt to me impossible. And I also felt that a lot of the burden of that would most likely fall on mothers and working mothers, particularly just because that's where most of the burden of childcare and education in our country does tend to fall. And I just didn't want to necessarily set myself up for a feeling of failure every day. And so I thought it was really important to just say, you know what, we need to think about this differently than just trying to do exactly what's happening in schools. We need to really do something that's working for us and attending to our sense of well-being, our children's sense of well-being, and giving ourselves some grace and compassion during this time. That's going to be terribly, terribly difficult for everyone, educators included.
Gwen Samuel, I wonder if you could jump back in. How do you respond to what Jenny is saying and the point about, not just going to school to learn, but all of the other social interactions that children are exposed to that also help them grow?
Yeah, so that's like many. So I work in the majority in the urban communities,
Mm-hmm.
and you got single parents households that have to work, and they're still trying to juggle home. It's definitely a challenge. I was refreshed by a Dr. Hayes out of New Jersey, who actually stated when the pandemic hit, their school did not immediately jump into the academic aspects. They made sure that the social service component of their school was in place, because we have many parents that have special needs children
Mm-hmm.
really not getting the supports they need, because some of the supports were in the actual school building,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have schools with community health centers that maybe help with mental health services, those services are no longer in place because the schools are closed. And then we have self quarantine. So there's a challenge of those support services that were outside of the classroom or outside of the home. Those children not accessing, and then of course, which brings on a whole nother set of challenges for families, right? Because they're part of their PPT or their IEP, their individualized educational plans. If it was for some certain specific support services, what happens to those children? And how are we going to measure their academic success if they don't have those support services? So there are a lot of moving parts with this. And I want to be clear, even though we're calling it homeschooling, parents are literally looking at that not as a formal education, but they're saying we're just we're just schooling at home. So I make that distinction, that just because we're schooling at homes doesn't mean many families are homeschooling experts, in how we define homeschooling. So I want people to know that, because we're saying, oh, everyone's homeschooling. No, many parents are just schooling to the best of their ability at home, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's a formal homeschool network.
That's true, Gwen. Join our conversation, 888-720-9677. Anne's calling from Easton. Anne, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Oops, excuse me. Yes, I just wanted to add to this crisis, this coronavirus crisis schooling. I have older children, but as a former counselor, the intent on public schooling that has changed and moved children who are very young into our schools. And I think those parents need to understand that, and I'm hoping they're getting it from the school district, that, you can't pop a child onto a computer at the age of 5 or 6. It's just not, cognitively and developmentally real. It's not appropriate, and that these parents can certainly give their children lots of arts and crafts and things to do in the home, which is all learning. Children are sponges, and parents, I hope, have good supports through their school districts where they're explaining that don't worry. Children learn all the time. It's not when you're sitting at a desk. It's not when there's other times for learning. Parents can be reading books with their child, and that there's other things. I'm kind of concerned for the parents. There's enough that they're concerned about with the pandemic, and I'm hoping that we will see a light soon, like the other states that are opening up, and that parents can be breathing a little bit easier, understanding more of this, and that their young children who are under, say, the age of like 8 to 10, who are really not cognitively ready to be sitting at a computer to do work, that they can learn lots of other things in the home.
Well, Anne, thank you for your call. And again, if you're a parent, we want to hear from you as you're trying to navigate your children getting schooled at home, as Gwen Samuel had mentioned, getting this work done, trying to retain what they may have learned during the school year with all of these other pressures at home and worries. Again, 888-720-9677. Jenny Miles Weiner, who's with us on Zoom, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at UConn Neag School of Education. So what are some recommendations for parents or even educators? We're going to be talking to a assistant superintendent for Meriden in a little bit, but we're hearing now that some school districts, they know this online learning, this schooling at home has become increasingly difficult. Some school districts in our country are starting to consider ending the school year early. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I just wanted to respond to the caller in the sense that, I think what's really important is now parents are also positioned both as teacher and as parent. There are spaces in which, of course, as parents, we're always teachers, but the kind of formalized teacher. And at the same time, they're also sort of the stalwart of resilience and support, emotional caregiving for their child during this time too. And so I think we just have to also think about, the pressure that parents themselves are under to provide for their child in all those roles simultaneously. And again, to sort of think about, how can we as parents have enough sort of resiliency and feeling of success to be able to make it through each day, given those tremendous jobs, those multiple tremendous jobs that they're doing. In terms of the sort of online learning, I completely agree. I think it's a very tricky situation because there are parents across the spectrum needing very different things depending on their sort of access to resources, their ability to stay home or not stay home in the sense of work or not work. So I feel like having sort of a menu of activities that are available to families without necessarily judgment about which ones they're picking and choosing that can help make their child feel like they're accessing learning is probably the best, right? Not necessarily one response that's best for every family, but to try to create resources and supports that can be accessed meaningfully for parents and kids throughout this process. Because there will be times where even I, who am not a total fan of technology, as you said in the opener, need to have my kids be involved with something online because there are things that I need to attend to during the day as well. And I can trust that because it's been vetted by an educator, at least it's appropriate in terms of content. There are times when I have time that I can attend to them and I want to, and we can embrace the wealthy funds of home knowledge and learning that Gwen was talking about, and be able to do that through arts and crafts, through other kinds of activities, cooking, being outside if possible, so on and so forth. So I think flexibility and really understanding that parents are under this tremendous pressure, as are educators, to be able to have multiple choices that all support the holistic view of our child during this very difficult time.
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. Nick's calling from New Britain. Nick, go ahead.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Good. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, a lot of people are talking about computer and internet access as being barriers. My wife and I are fortunate we happen to have those things. What we didn't have was a pencil sharpener. And you'd be amazed how instrumental something that mundane is when you're trying to have a 4-year-old doing some of her, matching and learning to write and learning to draw activities at home. So it's not just the big, heavy things. It's sometimes those little things that parents don't have access to. And as a teacher, I also try to make sure for my students that I think of that. But it's tough. And then there's also kids for who this model is working better, where, and most kids maybe not, but there's, some students, and my own son at home, he gets his work done very, very, efficiently, and he is self-motivated, and he's done more reading in the past 2 months. He's constantly reading, but the amount that he's done in the past 2 months is just staggering. So there are some students for which this model might work better. And I wonder what we're going to do when we go back to normal to maybe incorporate some more flexibility, like your guest was just talking about, some more flexibility for those students who do better with a less structured traditional classroom environment.
Excellent point, Nick. Gwen Samuel, how do you respond?
He hit it on the nail, because this is where discussions of equity come into play, because those families that have school districts that are 21st century state of the art, right? That those children have been exposed to computers ongoing, the digital landscape ongoing. Those children are navigating more successful than those communities that did not have that ongoing access, right? And the implications of that, because you're not only trying to log online to hear from your teacher, you're really trying to log online. You're trying to learn how to navigate the computer if that's not part of your everyday life. Maybe the cell phone may be, but not necessarily the computer. So we're also noticing gaps in resources and access, which is also playing a barrier, especially when we, as Jenny was saying, talking about that flexibility. There are parents who have made pleas, if you will, to the district or talk to the teacher saying, while we understand educators' days are full and you have your own children at home, I can't necessarily log in at this time because I am working, or I work third shift and then I'm tired during the day and my kids are struggling to get online or maintain it. So flexibility and just paying attention to the lack of resources in certain communities has to continue to be a priority if we're going to meet those most vulnerable needs.
Well, I want to thank Gwen Samuel for joining us today, founder and president of Connecticut Parents Union. Gwen, thank you. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. Have a safe day, everyone.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Jenny Miles Weiner will continue to stay with us, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at UConn NEAG School of Education. And coming up after the break, we want to continue to hear from you about you and your child's online learning experience. 888-720-9677. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. After the break, how should Connecticut school districts be helping students learn in these strange times? What strategies can help them prepare for next school year? That's coming up. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. What barriers are your kids running into when it comes to their Zoom or Google Classroom? We know even at Connecticut closed schools at the start of this pandemic, there were still plenty of school kids in the state who didn't even have computers at home. If you're a parent, we want to hear from you today. What guidance did you receive from your school district? How has it changed over the last month? 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Today on Zoom is Jenny Miles Weiner, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at UConn's NEAG School of Education. And joining us now is Beth Tarasawa, Executive Vice President of Research at NWEA. It's a nonprofit that focuses on pre-K through 12 assessments. Beth, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
We have you on because your group recently studied how these school closures due to the pandemic could result in substantially lower achievement levels for students. So tell us how you have been able to look at that and why your projections are looking this way.
Sure. We focused our research leveraging previous summer learning loss research, also known as the summer slide, and we used a national sample of over 5 million students in grades 3 through 8 who took MAP growth assessments in 2017 to 2018 to estimate the potential impacts of COVID-19 related school closures. And so the research compared the academic achievement trajectories both in math and in reading during a typical year where there was no disruption to learning, and a COVID slide scenario in which students showed patterns of learning loss typical of summers throughout an extended closure. And we modeled this for simplicity's sake as beginning in March 15th. And we essentially walked the slopes back of summer learning loss to mid-March. And our preliminary estimates suggest that impacts may be larger in math than in reading, and that students may return and fall with less than 50% of the typical learning gains, and in some grades, a full year behind. Reading was a little more optimistic, where we would see students potentially returning with about 70% of the learning gains relative to a typical year.
You mentioned summer learning loss, so tell us exactly what that means.
Sure, and educators and parents have seen this anecdotally, as well as in numerous data sets, that we see students learning throughout the school year, and then come the end of the school year, we see students have slight declines. This isn't universal across all achievement levels, but typically we see students showing some declines when they return in the fall, known as summer slowdown or summer melt or summer slide.
And so, as you mentioned, the preliminary COVID slide estimates in reading, 70% of them will come back in the fall at the level, but 50% with math that will be coming back, and that's actually more than what you would see during the summer.
Yeah, so it's not only the summer loss that we would see, we'd also have potentially the lack of instruction over the spring, last 3 months of the spring for an extended closure. So it's the trajectory of both the loss as well as the lack of instruction that makes those particularly more devastating. And we've seen that pattern in other types of data, so NAEP and ECHLS-K, and we see the loss tends to be a little more dramatic in those younger grades where the foundational skills are really needed.
So this is problematic. How should educators be thinking about this? Because again, we're in this time where they're really just trying to get through day to day, week to week, but thinking about academic regression for the next year can be daunting.
Yeah, that's an understatement, I think. And there's a lot of these are projections and they are averages, and there's so much trauma associated with the current economic conditions and joblessness, food insecurities, socioeconomic realities. So these academic projections, could really impact our most underserved communities. To echo Gwen's point, in terms of equity. I think, we're really struggling here to think about the restart plans, and they're not meant to be dire or kind of doomsday scenarios, if you will, but to really think about what this recovery will look like. And if we look at other examples of Katrina or inclement weather or chronic absenteeism, this could take multiple years. And so really thinking about how we lock arms and think creatively about out of school time, and really providing resources where they're most needed. There's almost a moral imperative here that we don't want a generation of COVID kids, that we're going to need to think about the long-term recovery efforts.
What do we know about if this online learning that schools have had to shift to immediately, will it have any impact when it comes to this preliminary COVID slide?
Yeah, it's been amazing to see some of the heroic efforts of districts, of individual teachers. We've seen districts and internet providers and other entities really work together to offer, free or discounted internet access, provide technology devices to help really bridge that digital divide. But, even if all families have access, the impact of technology could be quite uneven. And we know home environments are even more unequal than technology. Not to mention COVID's brought additional challenges in meeting, students' increasingly complex social and emotional needs associated with the crisis. So all signs point to educators really seeing great variation across their students. And so, one of the implications that we predict or that we keep hearing from our districts is come fall, one of the bigger challenges teachers will have is instructing students with, vastly different learning needs, which is always difficult, but likely exacerbated this fall.
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Jenny's calling from Bristol, but she's actually at work. Jenny, welcome to the show. What's your quick question or comment?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I have 3 kids, 12, 10, and 7. My husband is a teacher, and luckily he's home with our kids. So most days I feel lucky to go to work. Some days not. Some days I wish I could be home helping him. I guess the hardest part has been maybe dealing with the emotional needs. My 7-year-old often is frustrated, taking long periods of time to finish her work, even with help. My 10-year-old has ADHD, and the lack of structure has been really difficult for him. So I just I wonder how this will take its toll long term. And my 10-year-old is also transitioning to middle school next year, which I'm sort of fearful of how that transition will go, considering he's been out of school this long. So I guess I'm hopeful that they do go back for the end of the year for some period of time, but I'm not really confident that's going to happen.
And you're worried about the long term, as you mentioned.
Yes, especially for my 10-year-old. He has had such a great experience this year. He has a new teacher who's new to our school and our district. She has been phenomenal with him, and I'm just so sad that he's missing this time with her. She's really helped him grow so much during this year, and she's still helping remotely. However, it's just not the same.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jenny, for calling in. I wanted to ask our guest, Jenny Miles Weiner, to respond, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at UConn NEAG School of Education. We started this segment talking with Beth, looking at the preliminary estimates of what this will mean for achievement in our schools. But, it's hard to also think about this when you think about the long-term emotional and academic impacts on children.
Yeah. So I would love to respond and sort of try to put those two ideas together in the sense that I don't want to minimize in any way the inequities and the sort of idea that children are missing something academically from being at school. But I also think it's really important to point out that the COVID pandemic did not create the inequities in Connecticut that previously existed, that had created gaps already in terms of opportunities and sort of equitable funding and access to resources. And one of the problems or things that I'm concerned about, and this relates to sort of addressing kids' well-being and their other kinds of needs, is that if we frame this primarily as an academic problem, or solely or primarily as an academic problem, then the solutions that we will probably try to implement will also be fundamentally about academics. And many of the academic solutions that we've tried in states like Connecticut and elsewhere in the United States have really been around accountability, standardized testing, these kinds of frameworks that really haven't shown to make a huge dent in the opportunity gaps that already existed. So my fear is that when we plan for reentry, the attention gets paid on doubling down on sort of approaches that haven't really improved these structural inequalities to begin with, and the kind of needs that Jenny was talking about for her kids, right? So how are we going to create a school or think about school in new and innovative ways that ensures that all children have the resources that they need? That may mean different kinds of policies about school funding and educator pay and all sorts of things, but also how are we going to welcome them back in a way that makes them feel safe, addresses the trauma, the kind of psychological needs that have happened during this time. For example, could they possibly have the same teacher that they had last year and facilitate looping? So when they're being welcomed by someone they love and know, rather than also creating more instability as they return to the school setting. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about these things together as opposed to just about some, slide or academics or just about the socio-emotional well-being of kids, and understanding that in a context that already wasn't working so great for many of our kids in the state.
Beth Tarasawa, let's talk more about that, providing social emotional learning space when children return to school, whenever that is. When we look back at other traumatic events that have happened in recent years, thinking Katrina being one of them, and children being displaced, losing family members, but this lack of having consistency in children's lives. Were there any lessons that those educators learned when the children there did go back to school?
That's a great question. I couldn't agree with Jenny's comments more. I think when we're talking about these predictions or the long game in academics, they are intimately tied with the complexity of social emotional needs. And secondly, these are likely exacerbating long-standing inequalities that existed well before COVID. And I think you could say the same parallels with Katrina and many of the parishes in New Orleans. Doug Harris and his colleagues at Tulane, studied this for many years, following kids in Houston. And I lived in Atlanta at the time. We had quite a bit of the kids transfer over there as well. We also know how much that took for social emotional and traumatic trauma-informed practices to really support those kids. And it took, several years to get those kids back to the academic levels they were prior to Katrina, which were not great to begin with. And so I think to this point of, how do we think creatively, flexible, looping, it is a chance for us to be more creative than we have before. I'd also say, in many ways, one of the silver linings here is that we're connecting to families. So it's been really difficult for school systems to reach many of our families and for some of our families to reach back to schools when they have the ability to do so. We've done that in better ways, I think, in the last few months than we have historically. And so how can we take those lessons and continue them when we're back in brick and mortar?
I wanted to fit one more call in. Andrea is calling from Beacon Falls. Andrea, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'm a grandparent, and my husband and I decided to reach out to our children and offer some help with homeschooling. So I wanted to just speak about, it might be a good thing for parents to think about, do they have any resources, an aunt, a cousin, who might be able to help? For instance, our son has 3 boys. So it was very difficult for them to get the 3 boys all together and do some educating. So we each kind of took one of those boys and are helping, and also augmenting with things like playing chess via Facebook, and I help my granddaughter practice her clarinet via Facebook. So I would just recommend that if parents are struggling, they might want to see if there are any other resources that they can turn to kind of assist them and take off some of the pressure.
Thank you, Andrea, for your call. Jenny, I'll go to you.
Yeah. Well, can I adopt you, Andrea? This sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, I think that, one of the things I've been doing, this is a sort of side note, is I've been doing food delivery from the food pantry to some of the families. And, I text them, I don't do human contact, but many of them have said, I want to also help. How can I help? And I just love this idea of thinking again about school and learning being outside necessarily the parameters of what is just being sent home. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I love the idea of this sort of sense of wealth of knowledge from across. And maybe it's time for us to set up some kind of, grandma helps, where parents can connect with people. And I know my sons have written letters to folks in nursing homes who are unable to get visitors. And just think about the learning with that, and sort of the learning of kindness and also compassion and a sense of connection for those people on the other side, that they too need, kindness and support during this difficult time. So I absolutely love it.
Well, Jenny Miles Weiner, we want to thank you for giving us some food for thought as we continue to talk about online learning and how schools and parents will be transitioning to whatever schedule comes before us in the next few months. But we appreciate your time, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at UConn-NEAG School of Education. She also authored this piece for the New York Times, "I Refuse to Run a Coronavirus Homeschool." We'll be sure to tweet it out at Where We Live. Jenny, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so very much. And truly, everyone, just remember, you love your kids, you're doing your best. And right now, that's enough. So stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. And also Beth Tarasawa, Executive Vice President of Research at NWEA. Beth, thank you for telling us about your research as well.
Thank you.
Continuing the conversation right after the break, we're actually going to hear from one of the assistant superintendents at Meriden, and we'll continue to take some of your comments on social. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. There are so many school districts in Connecticut, but right now we wanted to get perspective from one of them about how it's managing as school is closed, but also trying to navigate online learning, grading. What about school milestones like prom and graduation? Joining us on Zoom is Louis Bronk, Assistant Superintendent for Personal and Talent Development for Meriden, Connecticut. Louis, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. Very happy to be on here, and appreciate the conversations being had, definitely similar to some of the conversations we've had here in district. And I just want to say a quick hello to all of our students, families, and staff that are out there listening right now. I know our Board of Education members and our central office staff and all of our staff miss interacting with everybody on a daily basis, and we're really hoping to sort of get back to some sort of normalcy sometime soon.
So how is Meriden, the school district of Meriden, thinking about flexible learning as all of the students are at home and teachers are trying to interact with them, maybe using Zoom or Google Hangouts? It can be challenging, Louis.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And so, I think our district's approach was, once we found out that we were going to be closing, we wanted to sort of get some academic work into the hands of our parents and our students right away. We're a little bit just nervous about just having students staying at home with all that's going on and not having anything to keep them engaged and feeling productive. So our approach was really let's get kids the things that they need. We have just over 8,000 students in our district. We have been a one-to-one district for some time now. Utilizing technology has been something that our Board of Education and our superintendent really values in regards to complementing the educational environment in the classroom. So I thought we were pretty well equipped to sort of get this type of work started. But there was still a lot of work to be done. I know at our elementary schools, even though students had access to technology and Chromebooks on a one-to-one basis, they weren't bringing that home. That was staying in the classroom, and kids were just utilizing that when they were in school. So we really pushed to sort of get all those Chromebooks out to families while there was a little bit of gaps there in terms of families getting the Chromebooks. We're providing paper packets to some of our elementary school students because we were hearing from parents that they wanted their kids to continue doing some academic work and continue to stay busy at home. And then once we kind of got that technology out to kids, we were finding just kind of what everyone else was sharing. There was some difficulty in regards to people getting onto Wi-Fi, not only with students, but also with some of our staff. And so what we were able to do is hand out a limited number of Wi-Fi hotspots that kids could utilize at home so that they can get on to Wi-Fi network and continue to do work.
What about, Louis, when we think about just some standard things in schools as we close out a year, even things like grading? Is your district thinking about like a pass-fail system, and how do you keep students engaged?
Yeah, so I know that some districts in our area have gone with some version of a pass-fail. Right now, we've held true to our regular grading system. We found that we find that that's keeping our kids a little bit more engaged and working towards completing their work. I know we've heard from some other districts who have gone pass-fail. They have had a little bit of a slide in regards to students staying on task and completing work. So right now we're holding true to our present academic grading system. We're monitoring that as we go. We've been pretty fortunate that we're getting pretty good engagement right now, but we are working very hard to sort of keep connected with kids. We've got multiple staff members. Our teachers are doing a really wonderful job of reaching out to students when they're not preparing lessons or on a hangout. If they've seen the student hasn't been completing work, just trying to figure out what's going on with them. And we've got a lot of different support staff and principals and assistant principals reaching out to families and students as well, just to make sure that they're okay, see what they need, but to connect with them when they're not engaging in the work.
This is a interesting time, of course, but when I'm thinking about if you're a junior or senior in high school, to not be in school or to be thinking about where you're going to apply for college or what are you going to do in the fall? I mean, how are you specifically reaching to those students who are close to graduating and are worried about the future?
Yeah, so we've tried to, all of the things that we do while we're in school, we've tried to keep those activities going on virtually in some way. And so, you touched upon that college acceptance process and that college transition or just post-secondary planning. I mean, those activities are very busy at this time of year. Students are sort of reviewing their financial aid packages. They're making decisions on where they want to go to school. Now they have to sort of consider that extra dynamic of, if I start somewhere and they're not going to have held classes regularly in session, but go virtually, is it worth it for me to kind of start, at that school, or should I stay closer to home? So our school counseling department has actually come up with like a webinar series for our students and families on the different topics that are pertinent right now for college selection. They've partnered with folks from Central, Connecticut State, St. Joe's, and Central to sort of provide webinars with information to parents. And we've got about 7 or 8 webinars upcoming to really hit some of the topics that are pertinent right now and that'll be pertinent in the months to come. I know, we've talked a lot about, that connection to school, and students really kind of missing out. They're doing the work, but they're missing out on those connections with their teachers, with their peers, with their friends. And so we've tried to provide as many platforms for that type of thing as well. One thing that we've done recently that was really generated by student voice and students kind of coming up with the idea and working with class sponsors and other staff was, students are making their college selections right now. And usually for them, that's like a really big moment. They're able to share that with their teachers and other staff. They're able to share it with their friends.
You guys put a slideshow together, right, for the students that have been accepted to certain colleges and universities?
Yeah, so students were submitting their pictures with what their plans were. We were creating collages of the students, tweeting those out and letting students put those up on Instagram, and just sharing those at board meetings as well to be able to highlight our students and just honor them that way.
And we're almost out of time, Louis, but in terms of like rite of passage events like prom or senior day, how are you going to manage those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the big one right now is graduation. What are we going to do to honor that rite of passage and really make it a special event for our students? I know our board really wants to make that as big an event and as special as they can. That's always been a big thing for our board members. And so we're looking at multiple different options right now. One, we'd love to come back and do a traditional graduation. We don't know what's going to happen with school closure after May 20th, but we're anticipating we probably won't be back. So we've been looking at different options, some with, students alone coming and being able to walk for graduation, taking picture and video, and then being able to stream that out to the different people who would come and watch. Doing something virtually if that's not possible. A lot of that's going to be a communication with our health department, the State Department of Education, and really getting information from our students and families in regards to what they want to see, and then sharing that with our Board of Education so they can figure out what works best for our community.
Before we go, we've been talking a lot about just academic achievement. How do you get kids to do online learning? What's going to happen in the fall? But there's also school districts thinking about how to make schools safe for not just the kids, but teachers, school staff. What if social distancing has to continue? These are all big questions that are still out there. Are these things that the school district of Meriden is also talking about at this time?
Oh, of course. I mean, we're looking at different models out there, whether it's schools that are in session right now or information we're getting from the health department. I think right now it's just really too early to sort of make any type of determination in regards to how we could proceed when we come back. We're kind of trying to see what's going on in some of the southern states and western states that have opened up a little bit more, what the impact of that might be on this pandemic. But we're just taking a look at what are the class size parameters going to be? Are we going to have to kind of stagger students coming into school like every other day on an A-B rotation? Is there going to be a max limit of students in a classroom? And if students aren't in one day, will we provide some sort of virtual instruction on their off days? So those are definitely conversations we're having right now and getting prepared for.
Well, we hope to have you back so we can talk more about some of those big questions that school districts, not only in Meriden, but across the state and country, are dealing with. Louis Bronk, Assistant Superintendent for Personal and Talent Development for the school district in Meriden, Connecticut. Louis, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Today's show produced by Tess Terrible, Carmen Baskoff on the phones. You can learn more about the show. Just download Where We Live on your favorite podcast app. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.